It is day 235 of the second Trump administration. This evening, the manhunt for the gunman who murdered right-wing activist Charlie Kirk continues. In the last hour, the FBI released brand new images of a suspect, and officials gave a step-by-step walkthrough of additional security footage. Watch this.
He's going to come out on the right, moves to this far right corner. As he does, he's going to climb off the edge and then drop down to the ground. As he did that, he left some palm impressions. There's some smudges, some places we're looking to collect DNA. There's a shoe imprint where we believe the suspect is clearly identified as wearing Converse tennis shoes. Again, we'll replay that again so you can get another view of that. It's important to note his black t-shirt, his black pants, and there appears to be some white on the soles of those Converse tennis shoes. Those are all identifiable items that we're looking for. In the stills that are going to follow this, you're going to see a very distinctive t-shirt with an American flag and appears to have an eagle on it. There's also a baseball cap with a triangle on it and a pair of sunglasses. All distinctive, all things that we would ask the public to look for and try to identify if they know someone who has those items, who has been seen wearing those items. We're looking for all that information. Here you see the suspect after dropping off the building. He moved around across this grassy area, around the parking lot. We're going to pan to the right. After he crosses the street, this is where he moves over into the wooded area. This is the video evidence that we utilize to track his movements and to locate that firearm in that wooded area.
The FBI is now offering a reward of up to $100,000 for any tips surrounding the shooter. Utah Governor Spencer Cox said that the Bureau has already received the most digital media tips since the Boston bombing.
We cannot do our job without the public's help right now. The public has answered our call for action. So far, we've received more than 7,000 leads and tips. There is a tremendous amount of disinformation. We are tracking our team, the state team, and I'm sure the federal team as well. What we're seeing is our adversaries want violence. We desperately need some healing. We'll have more to say about that in the days and weeks to come. More than anything, we are going to catch this person.
I want to bring in NBC News correspondent Steve Patterson. He joins us now on the phone. Steve, you have been in Utah. We all just saw that news conference. What more can you tell us about where we are in the investigation and what's happening in the surrounding area in Utah? Is the community out and about? Are they on lockdown? What's actually happening there?
Yeah, let's start with the investigation, Stephanie. I mean, obviously, as you can tell, the FBI, Utah Public Safety Department, still reaching out heavily to the public for any support, any tips, any video, any audio, anything that they can use to try to, what I would suppose is ID this person of interest who now has appeared in much more high-resolution video that they're showing, and they showed that at this press conference. Also to note, you saw that suspected shooter, the person of interest, I should say, climb down from that roof. That is where he left those handprints, those footprints that were taken as impressions that they are processing as well, on top of all the tips that you mentioned, over 7,000, which is quite a substantial amount. And then they said in that wooded area right to the right, where you see that roof, is where they believe they recovered that bolt-action high-powered rifle. So, I mean, that's the tangible evidence that they're working with, but they really have been hammering any additional information, specifically video, specifically audio or images that can be used as part of the investigation. And then, of course, IDing the suspect, certainly something that they want to do quicker rather than later. Not certain on the perimeter of the search. They said they are obviously sending material out to forensics across the country, and they have people that are also part of the investigation across the country. So it is a widespread investigation, and they are learning more. We are learning more details really since the day started as it progressed. As far as campus, I mean, campus is shut down, and a large part of campus is cordoned off, specifically anywhere near, obviously, where that shooting took place. Investigators combing through there, going in and out all day, obviously public safety members of different stripes, pretty much all day long. We have met with community members. People have been coming back. Students have been coming back. I met with one not too long ago who was telling me just about this sort of state of shock, this stasis that this community is in, not experiencing this level of gun violence, specifically an assassination on campus at the corner of so many different communities in this area. I think people are sort of processing and will continue to do so until this is wrapped up. Steph?
Steve, can you talk about what we learned about the rifle and the distance that the gunman was firing from?
Yeah, so originally we had heard maybe it was a few hundred yards. I think 200 yards was the original length. That is now sort of shortened down to about 175 yards. That vantage point, obviously above the amphitheater. If you've been in there, it will seat a few thousand people, estimated crowd size of about 3,000 or so. The rifle, bolt action, high powered, can obviously do some damage from a distance. Obviously I can't speak to the ballistics or the trajectory. One thing that was interesting to note is that in a press release earlier today, they said there were some specific markings on either the rifle or the ammunition, but police were working to confirm more information about that. They left that as a thread, saying that obviously this didn't come from official police channels, but it was one of the things that was part of the investigation that they were looking into. Besides that, we just know the location in which they found it, and that is a key part of the investigation in the timeline. Steph?
Steve, you are out in the field. You have been working 14, 15 hours today covering a very difficult story, and we appreciate you staying up for us tonight. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
I want to bring in our leadoff panel now. Peter Baker is here, Chief White House Correspondent for the New York Times. Carol Leonnig, our new MSNBC Senior Investigative Correspondent, and Rob D'Amico, MSNBC National Security and Intelligence Analyst. Rob, let's start with you. The manhunt is obviously still ongoing. What is your take on this investigation? What stands out now?
They don't know. They are really asking for the public's help in this. They have some good photos that they put out, but I think by the photos, I think this person probably did some reconnaissance because he's not looking up at the camera. And that's probably on purpose. Normally, people just have a habit of doing that and they look up. And all these pictures right where the camera is, he's looking down, hat on, sunglasses. And that tells me he probably had walked this route, knew where the cameras were. But that also gives clues, depending on how long footage is kept of these videos. They can go back in time and look for someone that matches that description and then start looking to see if he was walking through that. And then if they do that, then they can take the cellular data when he was there maybe alone with less phones in it than when the crowd was there, and then figure out what phone was there at that time and what phone was there at the time of the shooting, and then really come up with electronic signature of his phone possibly. So all that starts going in as investigators look at this. Every piece of this, the puzzle gives more clues that senior investigators are going to go down, and then they can look at the digital exhaust, people call it, of what he may have been trailing unknowingly through his electronics.
The whole world is watching this investigation, including the president. So the pressure is on for FBI Director Kash Patel. Carol, walk us through sort of the coordination among federal and local law enforcement and how Kash Patel himself, how he's personally involved leading this.
Well, the FBI director from moment one was very vocal about, we are on this. We're going to catch this guy. Local authorities are working on this very hard. So Kash Patel is trying to telegraph to, once again, an audience of one and the larger Trump MAGA sphere that they care deeply about this at the FBI and they're going to get down to it along with local police. But there was a problem, Steph, as you and the panel know, which was that Kash Patel announced rather prematurely that local authorities had a suspect in custody as if this was solved. In fact, the local authorities had detained two people who they ultimately released and concluded had no relationship to the shooting. So that was a little bit of an early cough, if you will, the night that this all happened. Patel also flew to Utah for this press conference. He didn't speak at it, as you can see, but he's presenting, I'm here, I'm involved. So has the vice president in terms of meeting with the family, This is very important to the president, so it's very important to everyone around him. The FBI director, of course, is a little bit in the hot seat, as you know, because he's now been sued and accused personally of basically trying to save his job by targeting FBI agents for firing for basically the reason that they ticked off the president.
Wow. Well, let's talk about the president and the White House. What are they saying today about the investigation, Peter?
Well, look, this is very personal for this White House. You know, whatever else you think about Charlie Kirk, whether you agree with him or disagree with him, people in this White House knew him, considered him a friend, considered him an ally, up to and including the president's son, and the vice president, who made a point of canceling his schedule today to fly out to Utah and will use Air Force Two, was using Air Force Two to deliver the casket home to Arizona. And then, of course, J.D. Vance had spent a lot of time with Charlie Kirk. Kirk was an important, voice for him when Vance decided to get into politics, running for the Senate in Ohio. And so, again, whatever else you think of the politics of this, whatever else you think of the investigation, this is a personal thing for people in this White House. And, there were tears in people's eyes as they watched the coverage of this yesterday. And so they're very intent on finding the killer, on finding justice for the killer. At the same time, of course, you hear them talking about this in ideological and political terms, quickly blaming the left, blaming the Democrats. The president said so in his 4-minute video that he released. His advisor, Stephen Miller, today posted a very harsh message on Twitter about the hateful and wicked ideology of the left that led to this this assassination. And of course, that only raised the temperature.
Just to interrupt for a moment, they're saying this, though, to be totally clear, we have no idea at this point. They have no idea who the suspect is and what their ideology is. They don't know.
That's exactly right. We do not know who did this. We do not know why they did this. We can make suppositions, and maybe these assumptions that we're making are correct. They certainly seem, logical on their face, but we don't know that yet. That's based on a guesswork rather than facts. And most presidents and most White Houses would wait for facts to come in before drawing the kind of conclusions you're seeing from this White House, rather than take the chance on inflaming an already volatile situation. This is not this president's style, of course. His style is not to call for calm, to talk about the political animosity that emanates from both sides at different points of the aisle. Instead, he used his platform to talk about the radical left as he sees it. And I think that's a very telling moment and a very different kind of reaction to what we normally see out of presidents of both parties.
Here's what we know tonight, and I am going to keep it as clear as the footage they just rolled. The manhunt for the gunman who murdered Charlie Kirk is still active. Federal agents say they have new, sharper images of the suspect and a cleaner timeline stitched together from cameras that watched him move like a shadow across that campus. In one sequence, you can see him step out on the roofline, hug the far right corner, then climb off the edge and drop to the ground. When he does, he leaves what investigators politely call palm impressions. Smudges, places where skin met surface. They are working to pull DNA. They also show a shoe print that jumps out at anyone who ever owned a certain pair. The sole looks like Converse. That matters because investigators are not just chasing a face. They are chasing a profile that includes habits, brands, and tells. They are looking for a particular black tee with an American flag and an eagle pressed on the chest. They are looking for a baseball cap with a triangle logo. They are looking for sunglasses that shielded the camera's eye, but may be recognizable to someone who saw that exact combo yesterday and the day before that. If you know someone who wears that uniform like a second skin, the case might be living in your camera roll without you realizing it. The step-by-step walkthrough is damning in its simplicity. Drop from the roof. Cross the grassy seam where the quad gives way to the lot. Pan right, and you can almost feel the quiet as he leaves the open space for the tree line. That is where the trail turns from pixels into hardware. Agents say they pushed into the wooded area and found a bolt-action rifle built to do damage at distance, the kind of tool that turns a public amphitheater into a firing lane. No bravado, no spray, one shot from roughly 175 yards, a line that only looks easy if you grew up thinking movies are documentaries. Real life is wind, nerves, and gravity. Real life is the difference between a shaky myth and a grim fact on a coroner's line. The scale of the public response is bigger than a typical call for help. Utah's governor says the FBI has already received more digital media tips than any case since Boston, more than 7,000 leads and counting. That is not just a number, that is a counterweight to the garbage flying around your feeds. Disinformation is out there in thick waves, and the people sorting it are drowning in uploads that mix truth, error, and malice in equal measure. The ask from the podium is blunt. Send the raw files, the original timestamps, the clean audio. If you do not know how to export without filters and compression, ask someone who does. Because what you saw might be a clue, and what you dressed up for Instagram might be worthless to a lab. On the ground, the community looks like any town that just had its innocence torn out by the roots. Parts of campus remain closed, cordoned off, sealed behind tape while evidence teams sweep, bag, label, and log. The amphitheater is not a stage today. It is a crime scene, and the people in suits who look like they are pacing to nowhere are walking a grid laid over heartbreak. Students drift back to fetch things from dorms or stare at the place where the day broke and try to stitch it together with words like shock and stasis, because what else do you call it when the real world plays scenes you thought belonged to somebody else's tragedy? The distance estimate that first came out was a round number, 200 yards. That has tightened to about 175 as investigators cross-check angles, elevation, and impact. The rifle is a bolt action, high-powered, and if you know anything about ballistics, you know that choice says something. Semi-automatic would have been chaos. Bolt action is control, confidence. A shooter who believes he only needs one pull. There are reports of specific markings or phrases tied to the weapon or the ammo. Police are chasing that thread but not confirming it yet. That is a reminder to everyone with a megaphone to stop pretending that every rumor is a public service announcement. In real cases, the difference between a clue and a troll is whether it survives contact with evidence. Let the lab do what the lab does. Now to the photos. The stills the Bureau pushed out are higher resolution than the early blobs that had everyone squinting and seeing patterns like it was a magic eye poster. In these, you can see deliberate choices, hat brim low, sunglasses that eat reflections, chin tipped down when most people by reflex look up the instant they sense a lens. That is not an accident. That is reconnaissance. He walked this path and clocked the cameras. He mapped the blind spots. The tell is not just what you see, it is what he consciously denied the glass. That helps investigators because they can roll the footage back days and look for that same head tilt playing the route like a rehearsal. The smaller the crowd, the fewer devices to sift. Pair that with cell tower slices or a narrow geo-fence when the campus was quiet, and you can start to separate the 1,000 phones of a rally from the handful that belonged to an early scout. If the same device pings near the roofline earlier in the week and again minutes before the shot, you are not far from a name. The White House is treating this like both a personal loss and a political opportunity. That is not me editorializing. That is what you saw with your own eyes. There are friends and allies in those halls who knew Kirk and are grieving. There are also speechwriters and advisors who went out early with a narrative that pins the killing on ideological enemies without a suspect, a motive, or a document to point to. That is a choice. Most administrations wait for facts because they understand that grief is gasoline and words are sparks. This one chose a different play, and no one should be surprised. The address from the Oval Office spoke in terms of enemies and contagion and sweeping crackdowns on people and organizations that the president says make violence more likely. You can say that kind of talk is cathartic for an audience that already agrees with him. You cannot say it cools a country down. If you are watching this from a campus in Utah that is still shaking, you probably do not want a culture war on top of a manhunt. You want the person in the photos to have a name, an address, a car, and handcuffs. Inside the Bureau, the pressure is radioactive. The director is trying to project command presence to an audience of one and to the larger political universe, flying out for briefings flanked by state and local partners, promising closure with the intensity of someone whose job is on the line as much as justice. That would be hard enough with a spotless recent record. It is harder after an early public stumble, where the director publicly suggested authorities had their man, only to walk it back when 2 different detainees were released and ruled out. In a manhunt, that is not a small flub. It teaches every witness with secondhand nerves to distrust every next update, and it burns time clarifying the difference between a suspect and a person of interest while the real suspect is already halfway to a new state. None of that diminishes the core police work that is happening while we talk. When you hear phrases like palm impressions, do not roll your eyes. Hands carry oils, salts, and cellular debris that cling to surfaces more often than people think. A palm slide across a rough ledge can leave ridge detail that may not be as crisp as a fingerprint, but still carries patterns that an examiner can code. Mix that with potential DNA from skin cells, the outsole pattern of a particular run of Converse that has scuffing in a distinct place, and the fabric weave of a shirt that was captured in multiple lenses, and you are building a case out of pieces. Add a rifle recovered where the suspect ran, a trajectory that ties that weapon to the firing point, and surveillance that shows a human hand on metal, and you are not far from a charge you can read aloud in court without flinching. This is the part where I ask you to do something more useful than doomscroll. If you were at that event, get your footage to the Bureau. Do not clip it for views. Do not drop it into a rumor thread that will chew it into confetti, submit the raw. If you know someone who owns that exact flag and eagle tee and that triangle cap and wears Converse with white on the soles and whose sunglasses are not a fashion choice but a reflex, call it in. If you live near the wooded area where the rifle was found and your doorbell camera or porch cam saw a stranger moving past at that exact window, send it. There is a $100,000 reward riding on information that breaks the case. But the better reason to help is because this is your town and you should not have to live in a place where a rooftop is a murder perch for anyone with a grudge. To the students and families who are trying to translate shock into action without sliding into paranoia, pay attention to the actual asks coming from the podium. They are not calling for vigilantes. They are not calling for roving patrols with smartphones and shaky courage. They are asking for evidence. That is how this ends the right way. With a suspect in custody because witnesses turned raw files into facts, because analysts matched pixels to places, and because investigators followed the dull miracles from roof edge to tree line to a front door. It is worth zooming out for a second to say the quiet part out loud. Political violence is the rot that eats democracies from the inside. You can disagree with Charlie Kirk on every policy and every sentence he ever delivered into a microphone and still refuse to let a gunman decide what counts as speech. If you want a colder take, political assassinations have a second victim beyond the body on the ground. They kill the habit of argument. They train everyone who is scared and angry to stop talking and start hardening. If you want to honor the person who died without buying the ideology he sold, you insist on the boring work of process. You give investigators the space to build a case that would survive a judge's stare. You stop cheering for conclusions that match your priors and start cheering for an arrest that survives a defense attorney's best shot. I am going to say something the internet hates. We do not know the motive. We do not know the ideology. We do not know if the markings reported on the weapon or ammo are authentic or planted or misread. We do not know what the suspect believes or whether his grievance was personal, political, or both. It is human to want the story to fit your team's script. It is dangerous to force it to fit before the evidence speaks. Let the lab work, the forensics, the tower maps, and the door knocks be the story for a minute. Then, when a name is announced, when an affidavit is unsealed, argue about what it means all you want. That is the sequence that keeps a country from eating itself. Here's the ask. If you value straight talk without cheerleading, subscribe and stay with us while the facts land. Drop a comment with where you are watching from because that helps push this into more feeds that need calm and not gasoline. Share this with the person in your life who is already drowning in rage bait and conspiracy spam. The more people who see the reality of an investigation rather than the fantasy of instant closure, the less space there is for the next person who sees violence as a shortcut. And here is the promise. We will keep following the receipts. When there is a verified breakthrough, you will hear it here in plain language you can quote without apologizing. We will not fill your brain with maybes dressed up as certainties. We will not treat a murder as a marketing pitch. We will treat this like what it is, a test of whether we still have the patience to let facts do their work and the spine to reject anyone who tries to turn grief into a weapon.